Today I'm going to talk to you about the 7 ways you can detect if some tenant is going to move into your house and then hold your house hostage for months, almost even possibly a year. This is actually very possible in a lot of states. If you all don't know, I'm an investor here in Baltimore City, but also the Maryland area. But this state is actually pretty what we call tenant friendly. So essentially, all the laws in the state favor tenants so drastically that if a tenant actually knows what they're doing and you don't, then they can actually stay in your house rent-free, not pay you, destroy the place, and leave. And there's very little you can actually do about it. And even some of the things you can do about it are probably not really worth your time. Now, I posted a lot of the information of how long an eviction actually takes. It's actually in another video, which you can find the link in the description below, so go ahead and check that out if you would like. But today, I'm not going to talk about how the tenants can actually use the eviction process and hold you up for months. Instead, I want to talk to you about how you can actually detect these tenants. There's a lot of red flags they give that when you hear them, you're not going to think they're red flags. A lot of these are just going to sound like normal things for everyday people, but trust me, I've been doing this for a while. I have 7 properties and manage 11 more, and many experienced landlords, even more than me, also agree with a lot of these major red flags. So if you see these, I highly recommend that you run. And I'm not going to talk about bad credit scores or background checks. Obviously, if the person is a murderer or has a 480 credit score, then clearly they're not going to pay the bills. So there's ways they can hide that stuff, and then they'll still reveal themselves as what we call a professional tenant. These are tenants who specialize in taking over houses for months at a time. And, we obviously have ways to detect them outside of the traditional way. So let's go into the top 7, starting with number 1. So number 1 is they need to move ASAP, as soon as possible. They try to get into your house immediately. They're like, I need to move in on Monday. And even if you don't respond to them in time by Monday, they'll be like, oh, well, it's fine. I still want to move into the house. They're going to be overly desperate and excited to get into your house. And they'll need to do so as fast as possible. Now, the reason this is happening is normally because they're running away from something. Generally, an eviction that's actually pending, or maybe they've pretty much exhausted the landlord's patience, whom they currently live with in their house. So this is a lot of the reasons they need to do this. Think about this from your perspective, though. The reason you should also see this as a red flag is it also shows heavy irresponsibility. Normally, when people need to move, they're not going to want to do so over a weekend or in a day. They're generally going to look for houses about a month out. So if they're trying to move out within by tomorrow or the next day or 2 days from now, then that already is a red flag for irresponsibility, even if they weren't a professional tenant. This same rings true for any excuses they might make. I actually had a tenant whom I was about to accept, and he was supposed to move in at the end of the month, so it was like 20 days later. But then he said, well, if I have to pay the security deposit now, because I always require a security deposit if you're going to sign the lease, that holds them to the lease, so that way they can't back out later on. Now I lose weeks of rent. But he's like, if I'm going to pay you the security deposit now, then I want to move in right now. And he felt a little uncomfortable. According to him, he felt uncomfortable about paying me money in order to move in a month from now, which is kind of awkward because that's actually pretty normal. So he really, really wanted to move in right then and there. And obviously this is a professional tenant who has upped his game, allowing you to get through the entire application process with them. And then they reveal that they need to move immediately. But at first, the person just seemed pretty excited to move in. At that point, I told them there is 0 way that you are getting into this house today. And after hearing that a number of times, they said, all right, let me talk to my girlfriend, the person they had, and then I never heard from them again. So that sounds like someone who pretty much didn't need to actually move into this place. That is a huge sign of a professional tenant. One last thing about this is if they are trying to move in ASAP, you're probably going to notice they move often. When you run the credit report, it will show a lot of places that they lived. If the person is moving every single year or regularly, and it's not due to improvements in their job, they're not using job hopping techniques and such for being a contractor in the IT industry, which we'll go into in other videos. But if they're not doing any of that, then lots of moving is another red flag of this needing to move out ASAP. So the second thing we have to go into is their complaints about the landlord they're previously with not fixing anything. There's mold issues and there's water damage and it's cold and they don't take care of the place. These type of things are normal. They happen. So obviously a lot of you here are going to say, just like maybe the last one where it's like, well, some people just need to move out immediately. Yes, they're going to sound normal. Well, this one, well, some people just have bad landlords. And that is very true. But this is a type of situation that professional tenants will use in order to justify why they need to move out ASAP or why they're really moving at all. A lot of times these situations are just guys, you're going to notice with these tenants, with all tenants, nothing is their fault. There is not a situation in life that was ever their fault. If they have bad credit, there's a reason for that. It wasn't their fault. If they have something on their background investigation, they don't even know how it got there. They're not even sure how this got there. Like, nothing is ever their fault. So if you have someone who has a ton of problems with previous landlord, you may want to go ahead and double check on that, especially if you're going to call the previous landlord and suddenly they're giving them an excellent review, which we'll get into later. Why is that dichotomy happening? I mean, yes. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible that a landlord could just be a bad landlord and they're trying to move out, but you should investigate further. Remember, all 7 of these reasons are ways to detect professional tenants, but they will sound normal in some circumstances. Now, the third way to detect these professional tenants is if they ask you, are you a private landlord? So this one is a huge one. I actually see this all the time in the city. It's actually kind of strange that people are still trying to use this technique, but they ask if you're a private landlord because they're hoping that your checks, your background checks and credit checks and such, are going to be less stringent than those of like apartment complexes. Now, that's not because you should be less stringent. They actually are just hoping it because most landlords don't know what they're doing. And so they're going to be trying to rent the place and they don't understand how to check for background, check for credit, and they won't know these tips that I'm teaching you here. And so therefore they want to apply with you because they know you're not going to be as thorough. And then they can hold your house hostage because, once again, if you don't know what you're doing on the application process, then you also don't know what you're doing on the eviction process. They'll be able to hold your house hostage for much longer. So if they ask that question, are you a private landlord? Run away immediately. There is zero reason for anyone to desire a private landlord versus a corporate landlord. There's really, yeah, sure. I guess they could probably say, oh, I just want to be friends with my landlord and get to know them personally. But no, most of the time, the reason is because they want you to overlook something. And if you see it, they want to be able to tap into that human element and your emotional side in order to convince you that it's really not that big a deal. Like I said, with all these reasons, these are normal situations as well. There are people in life whom ran across a situation, it needs to be explained, and it won't be understood if you just look at them as a paper application. This is possible, but I'm just letting you know that if you don't want to take the risk, there's too many good tenants out there for you to bother taking the risk. Let someone else take that risk. You honestly shouldn't be dealing with it. You're trying to get your place rented and be as happy as possible with the tenant you chose and not wonder if anything's going to happen later. So the fourth way to detect these professional tenants is if they want to pay you lots of money all up front, usually in cash, but they just want to pay tons of it. Just double security deposit and rent. And I promise you, if you take that money, that'll be the last money you ever see. They're realistically just trying to get into that house and convince you as hard as possible. They're trying to give you lots of cash early on, and they know they're going to stay in your house for a full year rent-free anyway, so it's really easy. And also, with 70% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, if you're renting in an area that's a little bit poorer, most people don't have several thousands of dollars to give you. If your apartment's, let's say, $1,000 a month in a kind of a lower end neighborhood, then, I mean, realistically, someone would have to have $3,000 on hand in order to give you that money. Well, most people do not have this, so it's a little bit strange that they actually do have this. And once again, there are people, of course, who are responsible but with financial education not taught in almost any schools, and certainly not rougher communities like Baltimore, well, it's probably reasonable to expect that they may have saved this possibly by not paying somebody else. So once again, all of these reasons are going to trigger some people. It's going to cause some annoyances where they're like, well, some people are just financially responsible, and this is true. But it is very unlikely to be with your apartment or house. Just be aware of that. Obviously, in higher end neighborhoods, they may have the money, but then their credit score is going to be much, much higher. Generally, they're going to have much more outstanding kind of statistics all about them. So this obviously needs to be taken as a total package of the individual and what kind of house you're renting. But just keep in mind that they will try to offer you all cash triple the amount you need in order to get you to agree. Now, the fifth way to detect these professional tenants is if they are a self-proclaimed neat freak and very orderly gentleman person, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, I've heard all kinds of stuff as far as people self-promoting themselves. And then also if they're just super excited about the place, like they're not willing to leave that apartment during your open house showings. They just want to stay there and try to do everything possible to convince you that you should rent to them, and they want to tell you all about themselves. So first off, in normal circumstances, most people will never say anything negative about themselves. Less so when they're applying to live somewhere or like for something like a job. So if they're overly enthusiastic about all of this, then there's probably something they're likely hiding. As we probably know, and as many of you know, if you have a decent credit score and you don't have a history of evictions and you have no criminal record and you can afford the place, then very little needs to be said after that. Like, it'll pretty much show for itself. So generally, there is something wrong. There are things they want you to overlook. They want to give you this feeling that all of these other things you're going to see, maybe about their credit report and such, are things you can just ignore. Maybe don't look them up on, Maryland Judiciary Case Search to see if they have evictions on their record. Obviously, this is, once again, another huge red flag. Also, be aware of previous landlords giving like raving reviews about the person. Remember this type of situation. If I'm dealing with a tenant and that tenant is a pain in the butt, let's just say they gave you the real landlord's phone number, which, I mean, most of them are going to end up giving out friends anyway, and you have to, detect that, which I talk about in my videos, how to detect that. But let's just say that they gave you the real landlord's number, and that real landlord is trying to get them out of the house, and they hate dealing with this tenant. Well, you call them up and you say, hey, this tenant wants to live in my house. How are they? How have they been with you as a tenant? They're probably not going to say, oh my God, don't accept them, run for the hills. Because what does that do? It means now they have to deal with that tenant. So they would rather just tell you that they had an excellent time with this tenant and everything's hunky-dory, and they want to almost try to convince you to take this tenant. Most landlords should be bothered and annoyed that you're calling them. You're taking time out of their day to talk about something they don't want to deal with. Their tenant's moving out. They don't care. Let them move. They want to get the new tenant. That's what they want to focus on. But even if they're not annoyed, they're not going to be overly positive about the experience. So just keep in mind of that when you call these landlords. They do have incentive to lie to you if they're trying to get rid of the tenant. Now, the sixth way we can detect these professional tenants is actually a little bit kind of stranger. It's service dogs. So what you're going to notice very quickly about these professional tenants is they do not ever, there's no such thing as a pet with them. They don't ever have pets. They just have service dogs and emotional support animals. That's all they ever have. And so a lot of times when they mention they have a pet, they're gonna, you'll say that there's a pet fee, and then they'll say, oh, it's a service dog. And this is where things get a little tricky, because you can't actually charge pet rent for these service dogs and for these emotional support animals. So they know this, they know the laws pretty well, and they're gonna tell you that. And it could be anything. Yes, I know even a Chihuahua can be a service dog, but they're probably unlikely to be. And so these are things that you can just be aware of, that this is a person who's trying to skimp out on as much rent as possible. This may not be necessarily a sign of a professional tenant as well. It could be just someone who's trying to get over on you. I think a lot of ways to detect this is not just simply the act of them having a service dog, but if you do actually get someone who says they have a service dog, you should be able to interact with the dog, and the dog should pretty much ignore you. It shouldn't start coming to you or starts wandering around. It should be pretty loyal and follow commands. Even beyond that, if they tell you the dog is a registered service dog, then that is an instant sign that they're lying, because there is no national registry for service dogs. Now, it's possible they were scammed and they think they registered for a service dog, but I'm gonna let you know, training a service dog takes hours and hours of training, which is very expensive. If you've paid the money for that hours and hours of training for a legit service dog, then you know there's no national registry for service dogs. So don't just take it on a blanket statement that you see a vest for the service dog and all of that. Same with emotional support animals. They're a little harder to detect, because obviously with a service dog, only a dog and a pony, certain types of ponies can be actually a service animal, whereas everything else can be an emotional support animal. So this is something that you should take with a grain of salt, but it is a sign that you're dealing with someone who likes to skirt around the rules. So make sure it is actually a service dog. Normally, like I said, you should be able to see the reactions of the dog. The dog should be well-trained, well-behaved. And the seventh way that you can detect these professional tenants is if they're trying to have you apply through their girlfriends or boyfriends in some cases. But basically, they're going to use another person to bump up their chances to get in. They're going to move this person in. Maybe they say they won't move them in, but they probably will. And a lot of times when they're trying to move in other significant others and stuff, they're trying to get you not to either check them, or the other person, that significant other who's talking to you, is kind of the front person, and then they're trying to hide their other significant other. So long story short, it's not an automatic bad sign. Like I said, this is the same as all the other ones. Could you have a service dog? Yes. Could you, just be needing to move out? Yes. Could you just simply be a financially responsible person, or maybe have come up into a large sum of money and now can move out of your place? Yes, all of these are possible. So it's the same with this one. Could you just really be only trying to move in a significant other? Yes, but it's going to look a certain way. Generally, it's going to be more like the person is consulting the other person, like in the sense, like, I don't know, you move into a house and then you and your wife, husband, whatever, significant other, look at the place together. Or maybe they show it like through, pictures, or say I need to take pictures for my significant other, stuff like that. It's going to look like it's a joint process. Whereas in the other scenario, generally one is going to have really, really, really terrible credit scores and everything, and the other person is going to have pretty okay or decent. And it's that other okay or decent person, that's the one they want you to check. They want you to ignore the other person. So this is something that you should keep in mind of, is that while one of them might be really, really responsible, the other one might not be. Or maybe not really responsible, but the other one might definitely not be who you want in your house. So just make sure to pay attention closely to that second person. So leave a like and subscribe to the video if you learned anything today. I know a lot of these can be a little bit tricky. Trust me though, you definitely do not want to end up in these situations with a professional tenant. There are too many good tenants out there, as I said before. Just pick the one that makes you feel comfortable. In some cases, I have picked the ones who want to move in a month and a half from now because they were so much of a safer option than the one trying to hand me $3,000 in cash now. So, I mean, just don't be greedy. Don't try to just give into your emotions. Really scrutinize. And I'm going to be posting more videos about tenant screening, just general tenant screening. This is not for really professional tenants. Let me know if you have any other questions regarding professional tenants in the comment section below this video, and I'll talk to you all very soon.